Hello and welcome back to awtoolbox.com. My name's Glenn Keller, and in this video we are taking our knowledge of the Business Modeler IDE tool a little bit further, and we're going to start looking at the interface for the tool. So to begin with, in the previous video we talked a lot about the BMIDE itself, a little bit about the components that make up the BMIDE, the installation directory, and where you can find your workspace, what templates were, and then how to actually come in and create a template project. We looked at some of the source code of the template project and looked at how we can find output packages and kind of what makes up the physical files that are being saved to when we make edits in this tool. We did not take a look at kind of where the BMIDE tool is installed from, or really dove into many of the interface components that make up what the tool can do. So in this video, we are going to start by going in and taking a look at where the BMIDE is installed. And then we're going to move into the interface overview of the BMIDE tool, and we'll actually use a use case so that we can kind of guide the flow of what we're doing. So to start with, this Business Modeler IDE tool that we've been looking at, if you don't have one installed, definitely ask other members of the team. Maybe they have a standard distribution that they like to give. But if this is just a training box, or kind of the architecture behind everything, then you'll need the Deployment Center tool, and then you'll need the Components tab of your environment. So I'm just in Environments. If you're on the main page, click the Environments tile, select the environment that controls this installation. There may be more than one in your list. And then you'll need the Business Modeler IDE tool. I have a two-tier two-tier just means it's going to connect a certain way to the background. You could have a 4-tier, or you could have a standalone. So any of those will work. And if you don't have one, click this little plus button right here, and then you'll have the option to add additional tools, or as they put it, components, into the build. So only add what you know you need, and then definitely select it. You could again have done the Business Modeler IDE 4-tier or standalone. I usually only have one per build. Unless I'm doing a multi-box installation, I'll use my mass client deploys. So in here, once you have that in the Deployment Center, you can do a deployment, and then you'll have the BMIDE wherever you told it to install. So all it asks for is the templates that you need, which we talked about in the last video, and an installation directory and a couple of little odds and ends. Definitely check out our installation videos. In here, once it opens up, you have a couple of primary folders in the standard perspective. So the primary folders here are, you have a favorites folder. So there's a lot of components, and maybe you work with one or two components more specifically. You have one or two custom components in the system. Then maybe you want to favorite them instead of going to look for them each time. I like to expand and just kind of walk us through. The business objects, this is going to represent an object in Teamcenter. So if I come into Active Workspace and I do a search, so I'll just come up here, make sure I'm on the right workspace. So I'll jump into the author workspace, do a search for test, and we'll see if my search is currently on in this build. It looks like it is going to actually pull up something. Okay, so I've got a test training item 01 in here, and this object is a item revision. So the types of items that you see inside of the system, item revision, folder, and item, are all represented in what kind of relationships they can have to each other. The things that you see on the attachments, where you see files, documents, described by document, these are all referring to a relationship of two different object types. And that's how they create the queries to receive these different folders. So when we're looking at business objects, we're looking at those types. And then the properties that you see on the Overview tab, these properties here, the all properties that we used to have in the Rich client, those are all provided on their associated object. So you can have different properties depending on what object type that you create. And if you have different use cases, say a change notice versus a problem report with different relationships to different data, then that drives the need or necessity to have a different object type. You could have different rules, different naming rules for different customers, different part types. All of those could, depending on the options that you have, justify the need for a different object type. But the goal is to only extend from the out-of-the-box types, and if you absolutely have to. So try and resolve the issue without extending the data model, and make sure that you plan out your object types and everything as a whole to make sure that you can take advantage of capabilities like inheritance. So it's a big one if you have 300 properties on an object, and then you want to create 2 more objects that have the same 300. You can create objects with a hierarchy. So you create an abstract object to contain all the properties, and then you create sub-objects that will then inherit those properties, rules, naming rules, etc. So definitely architect the process as you go into it, but these objects represent what you can see in the system. So other types are things like, if I go to the Explorer, we're used to seeing our home folder in the Explorer window with a new stuff folder, mailbox, the active folders, those types of things. So what I'm doing is I'm navigating over there. I think that my system may have frozen up on me, so you guys get a little bit of a real world troubleshoot here. Oh, nope, never mind. False alarm. It just kind of took a second to refresh. I am running on an Amazon build. Sometimes the servers will slow down at certain parts of the day, so we'll see. But I've got this object here. If I'm going to Explorer, it'll pull up home, active folders, favorites, mailbox, and you'll see other examples in this interface if I do a search. So how I did that was just did a BMIDE find, and I can find those elements. And if you just guess at first, if you just guess, type something in, you don't need stars or anything, you can see I've got a mail folder. So I could say OK or open an editor. I always like to open an editor because if you do that, it actually opens its editor and highlights it on the left hand side for you. And you can see why you may not want to navigate this tree, because there are a lot of different objects in this tree. So if you know what you're doing, I recommend it. But if you don't, that find is amazing, and that's what I fall back on. So in here, I've got mail folder open now. So in the interface, I can see mail folder is right here. So if I select it and I look, there is no type definition in here. So these are just other properties. So if I look at object name on this object, and I come in here to properties at the top of the screen, I can search name and see that there's an object name property, and this actually represents what you see on the screen in the interface. So name, name. Now it does have a display name. You can see this is a different type of name. It's more of a Cody, if you will, name. So this is called the real name. So the display name is what you see in the interface. And you can double click these and interact with them, which we'll do more and more of in future use cases. And you can see this is the name of the object and the display name is name. So you can confirm different elements that are already deployed, and you can see different elements or attributes about them when you look at tables like this or the table down below. Just note that those column headings across the top tell you different aspects of information, like whether or not it's inherited from a different object, You could go up to the top level object and change the setting to impact everything, as long as the template allows you to. COTS means commercial off the shelf, basically out of the box. And so that setting is out of the box. Is it overridable in your template? Is it modifiable, etc.? So there's a lot of information that can be provided on these editor pages. And then as we get into all the different use cases, you'll see a bunch of different information in each of the tabs that we can use to control the functionality of these objects. A lot of the out-of-the-box objects are non-modifiable, and that's why we have to create our own custom ones for different use cases. So business objects represent data that exists in the system. Extensions are extensions to either the system or a business object. So things that you want to do to them. In this case, if I come in, there are a couple of sections like code generation and client UI configuration that are either antiquated or are more relative to SOA and ITK coding. So if you're not doing that, you won't need to worry about those two. These different application folders give you different object type definitions. So if you have audit definitions or constants for all objects that you want to modify, then you can do that. If you want to see information like LOVs, which attach to properties. So LOVs, for example, if we were to come in and try and create something, let's do new add. This is an LOV. This is a dynamic LOV because it queries on the available objects that are available to create, but the drop down is what I'm referring to. So when you create something in the system, if any of the properties have a drop down on them, like this unit of measure, this is an LOV. So you can create those and basically just provide the value mode. You can do it in a dynamic mode where it searches the database. You can create a batch one, so it's basically the same as any of the other ones, but you can control their input and definitions via utility instead of having to do a deployment. So these are really cool tools and add-ons to properties and things that you can do. You can also do things like adding release statuses that then get associated to objects when they go through workflows. Tools for the use of data sets that define or point to an application on the operating system, unit of measure. For your data, you can define classic change objects like CR, CN, WA. Note types are defined down here, so all of the non-standard types or things that impact or affect the main business objects. If I come down, there's also property formatters, so they can get 2 digits instead of 10 or 10 instead of 2. Rules are a big one where you can come in and write conditions for workflows or conditions to say, hey, only apply this naming rule in this scenario. Extensions are defined or used on objects. Typically this is a place that customization takes over to where you define your own extensions to do things, but for one example would be if I wanted to on create of an object type also create a PDF and attach it to that object type at the same time, I could automate that with an extension called create objects. So in here will be a bunch of different extension types, and this is create objects. So all of these are essentially compiled code that you could use to attach to existing operations like save or create or post, and utilize additional functionality if they're not already attached. ID generation rules for more intelligent part numbering type things. And then basic naming rules or patterns and revision naming rules. So the sky's the limit in here. You've got a ton of features and options that we're going to be going through. In this example, we're going to just simply build a use case. So I have 2 additional properties that I want to add to my system. I need them on 2 object types. So I'm going to create an abstract item type. And then I'm going to add the 2 properties to the revision of that type. So the goal is to be able to come in here and say new, pull this down, and then I'll see my object type in here because item doesn't have those additional properties. And it's not recommended to add properties to the top level objects like the out-of-the-box ones. It's recommended to only modify your own. Now, I'm not saying that you won't have to. In a lot of cases, the provided templates will tell you to do so. But most of the time, if we can help it, best practice is to keep them on your own objects. So I'm just going to extend item here, and that way it doesn't affect any other object types that maybe I don't know about. And I need to add cage code and manufacturing location to it. So I'm going to come in here. I could create an item revision. Item and item revision are tied together. So essentially, if I create one, it's going to create the other. But I'm going to create an item. Item is the top level of that structure. It goes when you're creating something like that. We're just trying to get our Zoom It tool up and running. There we go. Zoom It is an awesome tool. It's how I do my arrows and my typing and everything like that. So definitely check it out. It's Zoom It, ZOOMIT. And if you Google it, it's provided by Windows. It's free. But in here, if we're looking at this, we've got our whole hierarchy, our interface, our components. And what we were doing is just kind of exploring the dynamic of what a business object was and what the editor provides us. And then we're getting into our use case. And what we're going to be doing is adding an item. So when you create them, an item is created here. Now this is primarily just kind of like a folder. It's a grouping for a specific item ID. What Active Workspace sees in the interface is one of its item revisions. So item revisions are where we put CAD data, Word documents, PDF data, any of those attachments. If you've been working with Teamcenter a lot, you know that specifications is a relationship. We have references as a relationship. We also have like change relationships, like a problem item. So all of those types of things are usually attached to item revisions, and then item revisions are controlled in the interface over here in Active Workspace. So when we're looking at things, you can see this object here is actually an item revision, not an item. And I can control what type of item revision I'm looking at. If there are like maybe an A, a B, and a C item revision, I can come in and I can change my revision rule so that I can see what I want to see. So I can see if this one had 3 different revisions, I could switch to maybe any status no working. So I only want to see the latest released object and I don't want to see any working ones. So if I do that on this object, you'll notice, let me scroll down, notice it's now showing me the item. So in here, there's no matching revision for that revision rule. So it switches me to the item, and then in the item, I can see the available revisions. So I felt like this is a really cool little default functionality if you switch to the wrong revision rule or one that doesn't apply to what's in there. But that's the place that you'll see those. If you open up the item revision, you'll also see information about the item on the Where Used tab. So the Where Used tab will show you a reference to that item in the system way down here. So they're not out of sight completely, and you can see all your revisions in one place. But just that's how the Active Workspace interface interacts with the item revision. They are tied together and therefore they get created together. So kind of doubling back here, I'm going to create an item by right-clicking and choosing New Business Object. You can also say BMIDE New Model Element. Both of them do the same thing. But what I'm going to do is create a child of this item. So if I hit cancel here and I choose to expand item, all of the different item types in the system, like part, are defined underneath items. So they all inherit items' default rules and properties and everything. They just all have additional use cases, and therefore Siemens has defined different ones that are available. So when you're in here and you're creating those objects, again, just to recap, I can say new, add, and this whole list of types are in here. If I do part, like it says, part is an option and I can create it. So each one of these is one of those types. And then if I wanted to create my own, I probably only want to inherit from item unless I have a further use case to already expand on a document or something. But I'm going to start by creating a common item. So this is an abstract item. It isn't going to be creatable or seenable. All it is a storage container. So I'm going to create an A3C underscore item. And I'm probably just going to call it a common item. So you can call it abstract item, whatever you want. Underneath here, I'm going to do a custom item type that I want to create. So I'm going to call this my A3C item. Now that will automatically also create a A3C item revision and common. So I will also get a common item revision and a AC3 item revision. So there are other objects that get created, storage containers, master forms, those types of things. But generally speaking, what we interact with, these are the objects that'll get created when I do this. So I'm going to create the common item first. I'm going to say right click, new business object, move this over, and then I'm going to say common item. I am going to go ahead and give it a display name just on the off chance that it displays and I forget to do a setting. It's nice to just make sure. So I am going to do maybe AWT common item. And then, so my display name is going to be AWT. The parent, what it's based on is here. So if maybe I selected the wrong thing, I could change it. Maybe I wanted it based off of company instead. So I could hit browse and do that, or I could just begin to type. So if I come in here and I say C, it just auto-completes. So I never really hit the browse button, but just make sure you click it and lock it in. Oops. Okay. So Teamcenter component, this is a feature that we'll talk about later. It's basically just kind of applying this to the A3C template. You could have additional components kind of helping to organize the things that you're creating. So you have like a new component you're adding to the software and you want to tie these different properties and elements to that component. You could use that to kind of track work items. You could use that for new functionality and deployments or helping to modularize your system a little bit. For here, we're just going to keep it simple and apply everything to our template as a whole. Description, this is our training template. And then here at the bottom, back when Teamcenter was kind of coming together from two separate previous softwares, Teamcenter Engineering and Teamcenter Enterprise. So it merged and became Teamcenter Unified Architecture. And at that point, they were handling classes and definitions a little bit different. We are now still handling that a little different. We have what are called primary and secondary objects. And all that means is that primary objects have a one-to-one with their class in the database. So the class in the database equals the object type. All the properties you add to it go to that class in database or table, and you're good to go. Secondary basically just means that it's a form or a data set. And if you just kind of keep that in your mind, that's pretty much what it is. But if you look at a form, it has more than one class. So that's what we mean here. We'll take a deeper dive into that going forward, but pretty much as long as it's not a form or data set, it will be a primary business object. Is abstract just makes it a hidden container, and that's the goal here. It's a common item. So I'm going to do an is abstract, and I'm going to say allow creating instances of secondary business objects. In other words, my whole use case is to make this carry a whole bunch of properties so that my sub-business objects can inherit them. So of course I want it to be able to have secondary business objects as children. I could add properties here. I could click add and define a property, but I'll show you why I don't here soon. Notice it just kind of gives me the option to do a persistent property. There is a better way to do it afterward and not have to worry about so much while you're creating the object. So again, if you know what you're doing, it's persistent property, go ahead, type it in, set your settings, but we'll go through those settings here soon. Do not click finish yet. So just a warning, go ahead and click next. And now you get your item revision definition. If you don't do this, your display name isn't going to get updated. So I'm going to add my AWT. Again, you don't have to add a prefix to this. I'm just doing it for visibility in the course. Call it whatever you want. And then in here, the parent is going to be locked down because I defined the item and they're tied together. The component's already been set and inherited down from the item. And then you can see this, they appended item revision for this. So they gave me a little bit of a default description, and then I could again add a property. Most of the properties do live on the item revision itself, and that way you can have different values for different revisions. But I'm just going to do that after the fact. So I'm going to go ahead and choose finish. And at that point, I have my A3C common item. So I'm going to go ahead and double click this. I could right click it and you could see different information about it. But I'm going to say right click and open. So in here, I can come to properties and I can see that it has inherited properties from the item business object. So it's getting this property from this location. It's getting this property from a location even above item. So this is just a broken out folder. The full set of these are under business object. So there's a whole tree here of objects that we haven't seen just yet. And underneath workspace object in here, we have to go to Palm application object. There it is. So underneath Palm application object and then under workspace object, this is the world that we see in active workspace. So in here you can see the tiles that you see on the main page are business objects. And then if I go down further, there is item, form, folder, the things that you see. Everything above this in the tree are going to be more objects that are kind of specialty objects or system level objects. So most of your work is going to be done in this workspace under Palm application object. But I can confirm that my new object is right here in that tree. Now you don't have to know all this or dive down. You could easily just use those shortcuts. The other thing that you could do in here is just simply right click the business object folder and say filter, hide all COTS or commercial off the shelf. Just remember you've done this and it'll put like a little, if I expand this out and then expand item, notice I can only see this now. So this is really cool. There used to be a little yellow thing that would pop up on the folder to show you that it is filtered. And it looks like that is not functioning at the moment, so I'll double check that in future videos. But you can customize, you can say which folders and groups that you want to see if you don't work with certain things. So you can turn those off. Definitely pay attention to those because it helps with navigation. So I've got my two custom objects here. And then now I can go ahead and just add a child to it. So I'm going to right click and say new business object. And this is going to be the one that I'm going to create. So This object is going to be A3C item, and I'm just going to call it my AWT, or Active Workspace Toolbox item. I'm not going to add any properties, but I know I have to update my item revision because this one will display. Notice I am not selecting is abstract. So on the other one, I am not selecting is abstract. So in this case, I'll hit finish, and I've created the object that I'm going to create. The object that is just going to be a container is this one. So in here, now I can come in, and if I want a property that's going to be a property for all of my revisions, if I have revisions A through G, are all of those revisions going to have the same value for that property or not? And if the answer is yes, you could still add that property to the item revision, or you could have it on the item. So it's an item level property at that case. But if there is ever a situation where that property value can change for that item ID, maybe through a workflow where you have to get approval for change, you can modify the property, get a different minor release, get it approved, etc. Whatever be the case, if you have a new use case for that change, then you need to go in and put your property on your item revision. Because on your item revision, then each time that you revise it, you'll be able to make changes to that. If it's something like supplier or a location and that modifies, then you could make the change on the revision. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and go to the common item revision and expand it, and then I'll open my item revision. So the reason I built the common item revision is to inherit properties down. So any properties that are going to be on my two object types, I want to put at that level. If I only put it at item revision, then if I have a sibling here at the same level, it will not get it. So I'm going to go to common item revision. This main page will show me the class that got created on the object's parent item in the tree, the item associated to the revision, and then the form or master form that we used to append and use in the background. So we don't really use those anymore to inherit properties, but some systems still have them on it. This icon definition is only used for the Teamcenter rich client, so this isn't applicable to Active Workspace. But if it is, go ahead and you'll have to right click and add your icon to this system over here to get it to show up in that rich client. And that is under your project files. In here are icons, and you can right click and say add business object icon and add it in, and then it'll become available there. But the business object constants, I highly recommend you explore. Inside of the extensions folder, there is a constants section, and there are business object constants, and the definitions of each of these are in there. So I highly recommend coming in and reading, I know it's grayed out, but you can highlight it, about this or looking it up online, because each one of these provides essential things that you can change in the system without having to write code. So definitely check all these out on all of your objects, whatever they have. It'll tell you what object type it's available on right here. And then the global constants affect the whole system. Things like index localized values versus non-localized, going in and making sure something will show 3D in a content table. Property constants will change things like whether the property is enabled, visible, exportable, etc. So there's a lot of different tweaks that you can do to your objects and properties using constants, and it's extremely advised to go in and read through all of those for the modules that you have deployed. If I go to the common item revision though, I don't have any use cases yet for those. I have properties next in this page. So properties are going to be the properties that I see and can fill out. It's not all of the ones. Just notice this is a subset. There's properties here when I'm on this home folder. There's properties across columns. So all of the properties are relative to objects. And my goal is to add at least one. I'm just going to add a new one called cage code. But I'm going to definitely look through here and see if there's any out-of-the-box ones that are provided that would make sense. So if I say cage, notice cage code is not a part of this. I could even try and see if they abbreviated it, but all they have is location code. So now I have a use case to click add on the right-hand side and then create a property. And this is why I said I don't create it typically when it's in the other dialog. I have more options here. So just note that runtime is more used for development. So if you're going to select this, you're building a shell, if you will, and then you can add your definition to that shell of what that property does. You can define a getter, setter method against it, and then deploy that. So if you're working with customization, we can take a look at that. But for us, we're just going to look at the other ones. Persistent is just a property. You set the value, it saves it, voila. No big whoops or whats. You can have LOVs on these. You can have naming patterns on them. Compound we don't use as much anymore, especially in Active Workspace. There is a interface level component that allows you to traverse relationships and then actually point to those locations using that interface code. And it is way easier than deploying out connections, and then the system traverses this a lot slower because it has to traverse it at the database level. So we try not to build compound relationships anymore, but compound, basically I'm standing on the item revision and I want to get the name of the associated data set up to the item revision so that I can see it at the item revisions level or report on it at that level. All that is you can achieve all that using Excel exports, or you can achieve that with style sheets and those types of components rather than having to deploy. Relations are just connections between two objects. So if you have an item revision to a Word data set, so there's some type of connection between the parent and the child there, and that is a relation. You need to make sure that you define your relation as a business object as well, and then you can add it as a property to your object to make it available there, and then you can actually hook up your objects with that. Table and name value, you will have style sheet edits that you'll have to make after the fact, but basically you're creating a little table of name value pairs, or a table will give you a lot more options. So instead of name value, table provides you the ability to do like a CMYK. Backwards reference is internal use only, so you're not to use it, but it does provide you kind of an insight and a dare to use it. We're going to start with persistent here and just click next. I'm going to call this cage code. I camel case everything. So you'll see me start it with a capital, etc. You need the prefix. This is the real name. This is what separates you from the pack. So this will get appended to all of your object types as well as properties. As you can see, there is a difference. There's a little a at the top of the property and a big A if it's an object. So it will automatically do this. It'll lowercase or uppercase depending on property or object, so you know what you're looking at. And then you get the display name, cage code. I'm good with that. And then we'll go ahead and say cage code for training so that I can clean that up later. I could pick Boolean, character, date, double, integer, string, etc. I'm just going to do string. We'll talk about typed reference and untyped references later. But they're just different they're ways to reference different attributes on different locations in the system as your property value. String length, make sure you set it big enough. That's going to be my warning. Set the initial value to null, or is it required, or do you have to have the initial value to a specific value? So I could say the initial value on this is null. And that way I could find it with a search later or something. It'll yell at me if I don't match the format. So I'm just going to say set initial value to null. I could set a upper bound or lower bound if it was a number. I could set it to an array if it's a specific object type in question. I could even have different values down below for like uniqueness, exportability. Do I want to show this during the creation of the business object? How about during the save as? Or how about during the revise? So I want to show this property pretty much all the time. So I'm going to go ahead and choose next. And then this is only for development if you're building a runtime property that goes and calculates information and populates it into the property, or does the reverse, go ahead and fill that out. But in our case, I'm just going to click finish, and you'll see it in the table here. And just don't forget, you have the ability to search the table, no stars required, and you can filter the table to find what you need. So I've got the property here, it is on the object, and then if I come to my item revision, just note that you do need to kind of refresh the page a little, so just switching to it worked, but if it was just still up, just make sure you switch off, switch on. A3C cage code was inherited by the common item revision, so I can see that here. So now I should, if I deploy this, be able to work with this property in the interface. So other things that I want to consider with the property, just real quick down below. If I go down in here, I've got search can filter. Do I want to be able to search on the data that was going to be in this property? If the answer is yes, make sure that you toggle this to true. So notice it says this property cannot be selected since it is not marked for indexing or storage. So filtering is when you do a search and then you get your search results. So when I do that and I apply a filter to the end of that search, well, probably not a good idea to do a star search, but in mine I only have a few objects. So if I filter further, like to all the PDFs, that's what search can filter provides. So will this property show up here for them to filter on? Search is indexed is the one that it's saying it needs to be able to do that. So if I say search is indexed, I could turn that on. And then notice there's two options on these. It says allow modification and custom templates. That means could somebody override this setting on their own template if they were to use yours as a base? Or allow override in sub-business objects. Could an object based on this object have a different value? So I'm going to keep yes, but let's hit finish. And then I'll turn filtering on. All right, so in here, just pay attention. There's also different things like your display name, initial value can be set, localized, modifiable, required, visible, some default settings here. So take a look at those, otherwise you may have to deploy again. Then you have naming rules. If you want to control what goes in there, you can create those. LOVs, if you want to have a drop-down list for values that you want selectable. You can make those optional or required. Property render attaches, just kind of controlling the format. Property formatter, localizations. If you have multiple language deployed, you can add them here for the display name. And then property operations are what happens to the property when you populate it, and kind of creates getter methods that you can write code to do different things and attach with. So the big ones I've already talked about. There's also different options up here like property bulk loaders, operations, deep copy rules, GRM rules. But in this example, we've got just ours. Now, if I go up to my extensions and notice there's an extensions folder under here and up here, I'm talking about the one under project files. There is a default XML file right here, and if I open this default XML file, notice it doesn't have much in it. Everything that I have done creating this item and item revision in the system has not been saved yet. But notice this is got a green arrow on it. So this green arrow indicates that this is the file that that code will be saved to when I save this object. Now, if you have the requirement of creating a new template extension, you can right-click extensions and say organize new extension file. And then you can basically have the code go to a different XML file rather than default. So I'll get into this in future videos, but for now I'm going to leave it green. If you know what you're doing, you can switch it, but just do not select dependency or master. You'll have to have a new one, a custom one that you want your code on. There's no downfall to having this, and expanding them is only beneficial if you're using source control. Alright, so in here when I hit save, it's Control-Shift-S if you're using your keyboard, or you can hit this golden save button up here, or you can hit BMIDE Save Data Model. I like to do this, hit save, and you will always get this prompt. So it's going to say confirm you want to save this project and hit OK. You could have more than one template. At this point, this is the code definition for all of the changes that I made. So when I opened it up earlier, it looked fairly simple, but one object type with one property saved all of this. This is why we don't modify the XML directly, and we utilize the tool to do it. But again, if you know what you're doing, it is modifiable. Alright, so that is saved now, and we are ready for deployment. Check back with us on our next video as we go in and get this deployed out to see what we can do after the fact in the Active Workspace client.